The piece I'm going to read tonight is a little snippet of a piece that I workshopped some of last spring with Melissa and Malay. Now, a much longer version is about to come out in the Los Angeles Review of Books, so I owe her a debt of gratitude, and I wanted to read a little bit of it. Did I mess up the mic? No. It works? Okay. In the longer version, this piece is a kind of long meditation on transness and resistance to neo-fascism. But the piece I'm reading tonight will not give you much of a sense of that. It will give you a peek into this fantasy I have about creating these queer, trans video introductions to Marx's Capital. There do exist these online video introductions to Marx's Capital. I don't know if anyone's watched them. Has anyone here watched these? Anyway, all right. It's just me, but they're very buttoned up and dry, and even I, as a Marxist, like, I'll go to my YouTube history and it'll say that I've watched Reading Marx's Capital with David Harvey, introductory lesson number 1, like 19 times, and I don't remember any of it. Like, I just have gone unconscious, with my eyes open at some point. And so I was thinking, like, I can't be the only one who's fallen asleep watching these video lectures. If I made like a kind of sleazy, shticky, queer introduction, maybe it would be more watchable or memorable. But I will say that the only shtick that I know how to do is channeling my late mother. And like, I don't have a lot of range. So basically this is going to be something like Marx's Capital through the voice of my dead mother, which has gotten a lot easier since starting testosterone, because it gives me like a yenta baritone. I think there's like only 2 ways in the world to get this voice. You can like spend your life smoking and blaming people, or you can take testosterone. So, all right. So anyway, so this is like Marx's Capital through the voice of my dead mother, mediated by testosterone. I'm going to start with this quick quote from Etienne Robert. He says, "The devil refusing to communicate to me the science of wonders, I set myself to making devils." So said Etienne Robert, inventor of the technology of phantasmagoria, or ghost projection. Prelude to the horror film, Phantasmagoria was also famously, for the theorist Walter Benjamin, a demonstration of the horrors of commodity culture, its strange animateness which holds us spellbound and deadened, fixed in the Medusa gaze of the object. But I've never needed Benjamin to make the horrifying liveliness of commodities clear, for I was nursed at the teat of consumption, a fact which you will instantly understand if I share with you the words of my mother, Barbara Lynn Horowitz Rosenberg, on the topic of the idiom gilding the lily. We all know what gilding the lily means, right? Like I was like 30 before I knew what it meant, because I was raised in a Yenta household. So gilding the lily means, well, actually, this is just what I think it means. So tell me if I'm wrong. I think that it means something that is so beautiful that it doesn't need adornment. Is that what it means? So this is not even words to a Yenta. Like, especially in 1989, like everything has a rhinestone on it. There's no thing that's so beautiful that it couldn't use adornment. So on the topic of gilding the lily, my mother would say, "A lily nice with gold, better." But does anyone need Benjamin now anyway? Now that consumption has been raised to the level of what Benjamin himself might have called hellish intensification. Consumption as a sadistic perversion of disaster relief, consumption as a veil for the annihilation of healthcare, consumption as a mode of perception, a parade of exchangeable images unscrolling relentlessly by phone, tablet, and screen. But long before we were flaneurs of our own bedrooms, strolling the arcades of commodity culture on little blue screens, comes Barbara, heading with a spellbound determination toward the Orchard Street Sunday Market on November 12th, 1989, 3 days after the fall of the Berlin Wall. I think this was before most of you were born, but you have heard of the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think. As Marx might have said, tragedy meet farce. Okay. "The Eastern European animal hide markets are in the toilet," my mother announced, nudging my father in his ribs as he drove down Broadway. "It's the perfect time to buy sheepskin." She glanced at me in the back seat. "Not for you." She referenced with one arched eyebrow the numerous times she discovered me compulsively returning to the mirror inside my father's closet, evaluating myself in his ties and jackets. This was not the first of my mother's not for you proclamations regarding things that were for men. Playing the guitar, bifold wallets, 501 dungarees, loving women, and it would certainly not be the last. The last, in fact, may have been the decree she issued while watching me eat a sliced tomato shortly after she learned via Good Morning America that lycopene was a potent anti-prostate cancer phytochemical. Why are you eating that? She scowled suspiciously. Tomatoes are for men. And that really did happen. This was a woman who loved and lived by the bounds of gender difference. Small, schmall. In Barbara's version of history, the demise of the Communist Project had nothing on the oncoming disaster of my lesbianism. Robert may have pioneered the science of devils, but as far as Barbara was concerned, I had perfected it. The devil I had crafted, of course, was myself. What the fuck is my mother's problem? I implored silently, cracking open Marx's Capital for the first time. Readers have come to Capital for answers to many questions, but I had come to it for the answer to this one. My mother and I were in a classic Cold War détente. Having not yet had the direct confrontation of my coming out, Barbara seemed to believe she could stave it off with the nuclear threat of her raised eyebrow alone. I believed that Capital held the answers to the origins of this expressive eyebrow, and indeed of all her alienation from me. An alienation, I conjectured, that had more to do with class than sexuality. I was the spat-out spawn of her clawing herself upward after all, and the whole thing had backfired because the elitist schmuck she so hoped I would become was entitled enough to believe I could do whatever the fuck I wanted with my life. If I understood Marx, I thought, I could understand my mother. In reality, though, I had come to Marx for a different question, one I didn't know yet. The question I didn't realize I was asking was about desire, how we come to breathe the phantasmagoria air of the capitalist life world, what the extent of its reach within us is, and how we learn longing from the most punishing of teachers. I don't need sheepskin, my father protested. It's heavy. Ugh, my mother waved her hand in the air. My father's experience of his own body was not admissible evidence in my mother's style court. All the stars are wearing sheepskin, she said, closing the case. It's come around again, I know that. On Orchard, no one had sheepskin, but everyone had a story. Not until June do we get a big run on sheepskin. Or, what good is sheepskin if your socks have lost elastic? Or, you want sheepskin, the guy at Manny's said brightly, luring us back into the bowels of the store. I got better than sheepskin. He paused for emphasis. Corduroy. Defeated, my parents settled on a tan corduroy overcoat with leather elbow patches, an item I instantly loved. I meandered through the boys section, feigning cluelessness, until I arrived at a junior version of a coat, much like my father's own. As I slipped my arm into the satin-lined sleeve, my mother's head swiveled, her eyes hooded like a hawk closing its opaque lid while preparing for a lethal dive. I stuffed the item back into the rack as she tunneled her way toward me through a sea of schmatas. I knew what was coming. That jacket, she blared, is for men. In a way, I felt badly for her. My mother seemed to think that if I could just be kept away from menswear, everything would be okay. Not days before, in fact, she had flicked her eyes over her copy of Red Book to announce, no matter how big your belt buckle is, you'll never be a man. If only it were that easy. Yes, I'll take the biggest fucking belt buckle I have all the day. Ultimately, she said, changing tack, you could use a new pair of dungarees. One of those semi-flared styles they're wearing in vogue. You want dungarees? We got dungarees, said Manny, pulling out some dusty 1981 Sassoons with zippers at the ankles, the latest. We'll pass, said my mother, holding up her hand. She loved a bargain, but God forbid someone should try to offload 8-year-old denim on her. What is this, the Iron Curtain? She gave him the arched eyebrow and whisked us out the door, issuing her coup de grace. Geh gesundheit, she called back, which technically means go in good health, but because it's Yiddish, actually means fuck you. Sort of a Lauren Hutton thing, my mother said, continuing the conversation about the jeans as we made our way down Orchard and turned unhoused into the car. Or Susan Sarandon, my father offered. She glared at him, shaking her head. From Rocky Horror, she accused. It's a transvestite movie, like that Christine Jorgensen. Her voice dropped several octaves in order to steep this name with its full horrific potential. She sounded like she was being strangled from the inside out by her own throat. I decided not to try to explain the difference between Christine Jorgensen and Dr. Frankenfooter to my mother as I stepped out of the way of a turning car. Meanwhile, I saw what she was going for with the Lauren Hutton jeans idea. It was, to her mind, an androgynous concession, an attempt to make lemonade out of lemons, a desperate last gasp to sculpt the oncoming tidal wave of deep les into someone she could still drag to Bloomingdale's to collect a free gift with purchase at the Clinique counter. Someone that some man somewhere someday maybe would touch if he had low self-esteem or was a bottom or a little bit gay. Not so much later when I did come out to her, and many years after, my mother would try to reason with me. No one likes sex with men, she'd shout. Marry one and divorce him for the alimony. There was a certain logic to this proposition, but the problem was that her daughter, a phantasmagoria in human form, was a commodity with its own recalcitrant will and desires and would not go to market, a devil that would not move off the shelf. How am I doing on time? I'm wrapping up here. As queers well know, this not moving off the shelf pans out well in the end for our homophobic parents. With our siblings occupied with their own children, we queers, once devalued pieces of crap left to molder on shelves, are suddenly the hottest commodities in town. So it was that later in life, just after my father's death, when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, my mother came to call on me. We made an odd couple, my glamorous, wilting Yenta mother and her butch trans helpmeet. We barely knew each other after 2 decades of estrangement, but there I would be, reading by her bedside at the hospital, or conducting the queer drama of my life by phone while she drifted in and out of consciousness. It was poetic justice. With little else to preoccupy her, my mother now found the details of my formerly appalling queerness cozy and interesting. Who's cheating on who, she gossiped. Awakening everyone. Barbara had developed a stock opening line, kind of a disclaimer for the nurses and doctors who would stop in while I was sitting with her to explain what in God's name this was doing in her company. I was no longer recognizable as a woman, but I was in an early transitional place and I was kind of illegible in general. And so, although I am sure on some level my mother wanted to clarify to the personnel of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, this is my incredibly disappointing daughter, that was actually becoming less objectively accurate. And so, helpless in the face of non-language available to her to describe what I was, whenever anyone came in, she'd just throw her hands in the air and shout, "This is Jordana, she's a Marxist." My mother used Marxist to indicate that maybe, despite appearances to the contrary, she had spawned someone semi-legitimate. What she meant by Marxist is, this person is a blight, but also sort of an intellectual. Which was uncanny because Marxist was sort of how I thought of my sexuality as well, or at least I had tried to use Marx to woo many women over the years. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
It's a great essay, it was funny, and I think it paid great homage to his mother. It really did.